Welcome to the Nobody Knowz podcast with Callie Zamzo. Join us for conversations with local changemakers and hear the stories that don't always get told. It'll be honest, messy and beautiful, touching and humorous. Slow down, pour a glass, and pull up a chair. This is the Nobody Knowz podcast.
Welcome to Nobody Knowz. I'm your host, Callie Zamzo. And I would like to start off this morning thanking our sponsor, Zamzo's. Very appreciative for the family company supporting this. And I want to give a tip of the week. And I actually called our buyer today and said, hey, I'm looking for a tip of the week. What are your thoughts? And he said the thing that keeps coming up over and over again at our store level is that people come in because their cat is not eating the food that they're feeding them. They're being picky about it. And cats can be very finicky. What we always think is that it is because of what the cat is tasting. And so people try different flavors, they try different meat sources, and scientifically, that is not the case. As it turns out, cats have very few taste buds. So it has less to do with tasting and more to do with the texture of the actual food itself. And that is what they're being picky about. So Corey McClymans, our buyer, was sharing to me today that that's part of the reason why Zamzo's has such a huge selection of cat foods is because people will come in and they need to try various textures. And then when they find the texture that works, then they're set to go. And they can change up the flavors then, and that won't matter to the cat. So things like shreds and pâtés and mousses, and obviously kibbles. There's all different sorts of types of foods that you can feed your cat. So hopefully if you've got a picky eater and you're trying to figure that out, this maybe is a solution for you. You can head into one of our stores and let them know that you have a picky cat and that you need to try some different textures and give that a go. And if you find that something works, I would love to hear about it. So, okay. So we're kind of heading into end of year festivities. They're sort of upon us. And it's time, I think, a nice time for us to purposely choose to slow down a little bit. There are so many things going on. We have maybe visitors in town and that sort of thing. And I think it can be a time of year that if we don't slow down, we get through it. We just put our heads down and we get through it. And then after it's over, we have regrets. So at this point in the year, it's still in front of us. We still can make choices. We can still decide that we're going to be our best version of ourselves, that we can take a deep breath, that when somebody says something that makes us mad at the dinner table, we can just take a bite of turkey and go on and let it ride. So that's kind of where I am today. And I think part of the reason why I'm feeling this way is that our guest today is somebody that I absolutely adore. My husband and I sat down at a table. It was a dinner where people was not assigned seating. And there were a lot of people that we didn't know there. And we sat down and these two wonderful people sat down at our table and we had the best conversation. And what's funny, as I look back on that conversation, I remember thinking, what interesting people these people were. And I didn't even know the half of it. Since then, we've had dinner a couple more times and I've learned so much more. And I'm really excited to share the story of this wonderful guest. So please welcome into the studio, Norb Murray. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me here.
I want to introduce you to with all these things that you do, but I think what I'm going to do instead of doing that is let's let it reveal itself as we're talking, because that was how I learned, and it was really fun. It's because you are an extraordinary human. You wouldn't know it because you are not. You aren't, throwing it around everywhere. But if people just take a moment and ask you a few questions, you've got a wonderful story. It's lovely. It's lovely to have you here. So let's start off. Maybe just in whatever way you want. Maybe give us just a little like background on you and how you ended up in Boise.
Okay. Well, I'm third generation California, and I guess when I was 18, I went off to college in Wisconsin on an ROTC scholarship and kind of put California in the rearview mirror. And I'd grown up around the military. My grandfather was very much involved with the Navy. In his home, he had a bar room that was it was like a Navy museum. So that's what my goal was.
Mm.
And then from there, I just went into the Marine Corps as a Marine Aviation cadet, got my commission and as a second lieutenant and an aviator, and flew helicopters. Spent 25 years doing that. And then when we retired, Leah, my wife, was from British Columbia, and I, again, from California. So we decided anywhere west of the Rockies was where we were going to live. We had a motor home, and we explored the West Coast and had Portland as a base. And we couldn't find the home that we wanted to say, this is going to be it. And so we used a local park there, RV park, and looked at houses around and said, well, let's just buy a home here and we'll keep looking. Well, it took us 30 years. And it was actually some friends of ours. He was very concerned about estate taxes. And they said, well, let's look around. And at that point, Leah and I were looking to go from a 2-story home to a 1-story home to get rid of the stairs. And they couldn't find anything in the local Portland area that we liked. And so let's go over to Idaho. We've been here for 4 years and decided this is our forever home. Whatever forever means to these days.
We're so glad to have you. We're glad that you decided to come over
here. We love it here. We do.
It's wonderful to have you here. And you've certainly added to my life by being here. And I'm sure you've done with many others. And we'll get to that. I know you have. So let's dive in a little bit to the Marine Corps. Because you and thank you, by the way, for not revealing all the secrets of what we're about to talk about. You did a great job of skimming over that. But this was a huge part of your life. So, and in particular, let's talk about the fact that you were a helicopter pilot. So, tell us about that. Like, when did you decide that that was the direction you wanted to go, and that was going to be your passion?
I grew up influenced by the Navy. One of the first memories that I have was World War II, sneaking down. My mother and I lived with my grandparents, and they had the big house and had the little pajamas with the little feet on the bottom, and sneaking down. And my grandfather would get these films from the war in the Pacific, and they would show them. He'd invite his friends in, and they would show these films. And I can remember peeking around the corner and watching these, the big Navy guns going off. So I can still picture that. Mm-hmm. And that was like 80 years ago.
Wow.
And anyway, he had this bar room, which was a museum, and it was made up of, like, there was a small table that was made out of a piece of the USS Alabama. And he had a bench that was made out of teak wood that was off the deck of the USS Maryland. And these are all ships that had been retired at some point. And it was, and I can remember Admiral Halsey, who anybody familiar with World War II will know was the admiral in the Pacific. And I remember he was at my grandfather's house, and I was standing by. He was in a rocking chair, and I had a balloon, a helium balloon, and he had a cigarette in his left hand, and it just and he rocked the chair, and the cigarette came back and popped my balloon. I can still picture that from all those years ago. So bottom line was, my dad was in the Pacific in the Navy, so I was going to go in the Navy. Well, I mentioned that I had an ROTC scholarship to Wisconsin, and my first midshipman cruise between the freshman and sophomore years was aboard a destroyer in Long Beach. Well, the destroyer had been damaged, and they were in for repairs, and they couldn't go anywhere. So our excitement was getting up in the middle of the night and guarding the front deck of the ship. And that's what we did as midshipmen, useless, just tasks. And we went out. They put us on another ship and then another ship. And I guess the big memory of that was we did get to go up to Seattle. And I remember getting seasick.
Oh.
That was actually only twice did I ever get seasick, and that was the first one. Well, at that point, I decided, nope, I'm going to go in the Marine Corps so I don't have to spend all this time at sea. Well, that didn't pay off well because I ended up spending 5 years on a ship anyway. So anyway, I wasn't real serious about school and ended up having to take a break after about 2 years. And I was driving a truck for a tree service, and I thought, what in the hell am I doing? Said, I had all these plans, and here I am, I'm not following what I had set out to do. They had a program called the Marine Aviation Cadet Program that went back to actually Korea. And if you had 2 years of college, you could go into aviation training. So November 10th, 1964, I rode it on a bus into Pensacola, which just happened to be the Marine Corps birthday, the November the 10th. And then they have Veterans Day on November the 11th, which I always thanked them for having since we could recover, had a day off after celebrating on the 10th, a day of recovery. And that did it. And at that point, Vietnam was starting to gear up. So everybody that took about a year and a half to go through the program. And when we graduated, you got your wings and your commission at the same time. So I became a second lieutenant and a naval aviator on the same day. And they needed helicopter pilots in Vietnam. So we had no choice. Normally you could choose, I was the top Marine graduate at that time, you could choose between helicopters, jets, or transports. But as I said, they needed helicopter pilots, so I became a helicopter pilot.
I'm speechless. I think mostly because when I think of Vietnam and the things that I've read about it, helicopters, there seems like there's always a theme around helicopters and things that happened to helicopters. Was that scary? That's a stupid question, I realize.
Well, I joined a squadron. Marine Corps, they had, Vietnam was divided into corps. And the very northern part of southern Vietnam was the Roman symbol 1. And then there was like 6 corps throughout Vietnam. Instead of saying 1, we'd say I, because that's the Roman symbol with I, so we called it I Corps. And it's right up on the demilitarized zone from between the ocean and was on the east side, and Lao was on the west side, and North Vietnam was on the north side, and then Lao was on the west side. And so you had this narrow piece, and that was our area of responsibility. And my very first, been there maybe 5 days, and we were based out of a place called Phu Bai, which was a little north of Da Nang. And we had a number of bases that we supported that were up between Phu Bai and the demilitarized zone. And one of them was called Dong Ha. And Dong Ha was kind of a rustic, to give it a nice name, a base. We had they had wooden huts that we would stay in. We'd go up and we'd spend maybe 5 days at a time up there, doing missions all along the DMZ. And there were fire bases and different out camps that the Marines had. And we were there, and I had this terrible odor. and it's the odor of death. And I said, boy, that's a strong. And I looked over, and there was a row of body bags lying in front of a hangar waiting to be picked up. And what had happened was that the Marines that were along the DMZ, right on the DMZ itself, got overrun, and they couldn't get back in to pick up the Marines that had been killed for about 4 days. And part of our ethos is we don't leave a Marine behind.
Right.
And so it took 4 days to get in there and get them out of there. And that was my introduction. And I said, this is for real. And then I guess it was spent a year basically out of the same place doing, and it was the year that it went from as we called it, a gentleman's war, where you went out and you operated during the day, and then at night things went quiet and both sides went home, so to speak, and it was quiet. Well, that ended very quickly. And I remember, I have a souvenir on my little souvenir shelf at home it's a mortar tail. And we got attacked one night, and the water table was so high that you couldn't dig anything into the sand because it would fill with water. So our living quarters were little huts built on stilts, and there would be 6 or 8 of us to a hut. And right outside the hut, we had a bunker made out of sandbags. So if something came up, you'd run out and you'd climb into the bunker, and it was covered with sandbags, so it was protected. And we got under attack and went down and hid in the bunker, and came back, and I had a little desk made out of a box next to my cot, and this mortar tail was buried into the desk, and it had hit the roof of the hut and it exploded, and of course the tail, was still in good shape, went and buried itself in my writing desk that I had, and made writing letters difficult because I had this big hole there. But I still have that as a souvenir, along with shrapnel and stuff. That's when you knew it was real. But we'd go out at night. Night medevac was probably the
Scariest.
Curl your toes, yeah, because you go out, and when you went out, somebody was in real trouble. And they're under attack, and they're either had to get wounded out of there right away, or they're running low on ammunition, and they needed, to be a resupply. And so you'd go and you'd circle overhead, and they would pop a flare so you knew where they were. And you could tell where people were by the ammunition. Every 6th round, it would light up.
Okay.
And so you could see at night, you could see the bullets flying back and forth. So you knew which way to come in from. Usually we'd get directly overhead and do a spiral down into the zone, and either pick up the wounded or drop off supplies or whatever was needed. And that was scary.
Yeah.
You didn't want to do that too often.
Just hearing about it just is making me making my palms sweat.
Then one time, one of the ones we went into was actually in a Vietnamese graveyard. It was in the middle of the night, and they'd sent flares up. So we landed, and you're in among all these and the monuments in the graveyard were above the ground. So you're in among these monuments, and there's all this smoke going, and it's dark, and you can see shadows, and you don't know if they're good guys or bad guys. We got our radios shot out, and so to communicate within the helicopter, you had to yell at each other, which was kind of interesting. And got out of there, and we picked up I'll never forget, and we had a few other things wrong, so we got back to what's called Charlie Med. And Charlie Med was sort of one of the initial points coming out of the field where they give them initial help before they take them to a more capable medical facility, such as one of the hospital ships or a bigger hospital, something like that, and just shut down there. We didn't want to go back to the base. I remember walking in and the young kid we'd picked up, he had what you call a sucking chest wound. He'd been hit right in the middle of the chest with a round and gone into his lungs. And so he was lying there and you could see air going in and out of his lungs. And I always wondered to this day, did he make it or not? I like to think he did. I like to think somewhere there's, well, he's not a young man anymore, but he's there and he's got a little scar in the middle of his chest, but he's able to live a productive life. And that's why I did it. That's the important thing, is to give somebody back their life or to help them.
I don't even know these stories. These aren't even the stories I was thinking we were getting to, but this is, I just love you so much. You're just such an interesting human, and you're extraordinary. And that thank you for sharing that information with us.
And some of the other things, it wasn't to relieve the pressure of what you were facing. We had our own little bar. It was a Quonset hut that they'd built up, and it was pretty well stocked, and so they could get pretty rowdy at night. And I had the title of the Songmaster of Fubai. And there's probably not a song that I could repeat in public, but it was a distraction.
Yeah.
And I saw guys, some that were just very mild and very religious and this sort of thing, just, you got to let the steam off somehow.
Yeah.
We'd go out every day. There was a river that went into Da Nang, and that's where the freighters would come in with supplies. And there was a ship that would come out of the Philippines that you could recognize from the air. It was a small freighter. And when it came in, we knew what was on it. There was Black Label beer.
Ah.
And so we would send, about a day after, we'd send 2 helicopters down to Da Nang, and we'd fill one of them up right to the maximum with cases of Black Label beer. And we treated them like stock on the stock market, that for $10 you could buy your own case of beer, and underneath one of the huts they'd cut a hole in the floor and they put a trap door in, and underneath the hut they'd taken sandbags, and it was like a vault, and that was the beer storage. And all the beer was stored in this one hut, and you were given a certificate. And when you wanted your case of beer, you'd go turn in your certificate, and you get your case of beer, and you do whatever. Half the time you had to drink it warm, but it was also good trade bait, because we had an Air Force. It was a listening post nearby, and they got all the cool stuff. They got blankets and they got steaks. So for a case of beer, you could go and trade for a real blanket, because you get cold in the wintertime, or a steak, because we ate out of cans. Wow. And so it was, and you go up and you trade. Guys would go up, and there was a place we'd go to. It was a village right at the corner where Vietnam, North and South Vietnam, and Laos came together, and there was a little mountain yard village. And the mountain yards were indigenous people. They had this village, and they actually still use crossbows. And that was the thing to do, is to go and trade for a crossbow. So we'd take blankets or trinkets or whatever up there, and if you got a crossbow, you had really scored.
Wow. Well, can you tell us about the day that you left?
For Vietnam, you had to go to Okinawa. You'd sit there just waiting for a flight. And it was it happened to be the Marine Corps birthday that was there, and we had to take all our uniforms with us, our blues, our greens, our dress uniform, like we really needed them in the country. But when I got to Okinawa, they made us, all the officers there, they actually held us up a day of leaving so we could be there to form up a ceremonial unit for the Marine Corps birthday, which was kind of fun. It was memorable, I guess, to give it a good twist to it.
But you wanted to, like, you were ready to go, right?
Yeah,
you
I was
didn't
ready
really
to go. And I managed to, most of the Marines went into Southern California, but I was born and raised up in Northern California, north of San Francisco. And so I managed to weasel my way into a flight that went into, I think it was Travis Air Force Base, which is just north of San Francisco. So I can see my grandmother and my parents and my brother that just had a baby. So my first niece was just 1 year old. I can still see him there, and I was ready to get back with life.
Yeah. Yeah. So then after that, you just pretty much rolled it up and didn't do anything else, right? Of course, I'm kidding. Tell us about the next chapter.
Well, I went on next Marine Corps wise or next.
Yeah.
Well, from there, got stationed in North Carolina, and I'd gone through training as what's called a forward air controller, and that's somebody that's assigned to a ground unit that actually is liaison between the ground commander and aviation. So be it helicopters or calling in an airstrike or anything to do with aviation, I was kind of the link that the commanding went through. And I was assigned to a Marine Battalion, 1st Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment in North Carolina. And that was really interesting. I had a 2 or 3 guys that worked for me, and we got to deploy down to the Caribbean for 6 months. So that was fun. Like calling in airstrike, we had a place where they could drop bombs, and actually that was in North Carolina, to call in aircraft to, okay, you're off target, more, 100 yards to the left or west or east or whatever it was, calling in medevacs. I remember in the driving rain on St. Eustatius Island in the Caribbean, having to sleep with nothing more than a blanket on the ground in the mud. I said, well, I guess this is what you do when you got to do it.
Oh.
And that was, so I spent 6 months doing that before going back to the aviation component again. And I'd been married, had gotten married. I was actually a girl I'd met in Pensacola going through training. If anybody's ever seen An Officer and a Gentleman, this was a version of it. I was the aviation student going through, and she worked for a local company in Pensacola. We met at a football game, but our backgrounds were so different it didn't last very long. It lasted through my first tour. So I said, I got to get out of town, and I volunteered to go back to Vietnam. Got as far as Okinawa, and President Nixon had put a cap on the number of combatants that were allowed back into Vietnam at something like 100,000 or something. So I was told, you got to stay here. Well, that just broke my heart, that instead of going and having cold rations and hot days and being shot at, that I was going to get a real bed and warm food, cold beer, and I guess the only shots would have been out of a whiskey bottle. And we linked up with the school teachers, all the local school teachers. And I did spend 6 months on a ship. Again, I mentioned, I didn't want to be in the Navy, but I did spend 2 tours in the Caribbean and a couple of tours off of Vietnam and what we call Westpac. We never did go into Vietnam. We were there in case we were needed. Mm-hmm. We had a battalion of Marines, and they were so strict about the number of Marines that could be in country that to get our mail, they had to send in the Navy's ship's helicopter to go and pick up the mail, because there'd be too many Marines if they took a Marine helicopter in. So go figure.
Boy, yeah.
From there, I got a year to go back to school. And I went back to Cal Berkeley, 1970. And there was it was called the bootstrap program. And if you were near getting your degree, the Marine Corps would give you a year off. You were still officially on duty to go to college. And there was a Marine that had been the year prior to when I went there, and he said, "Whatever you do, don't tell anybody you're a Marine." And he said, "Even your professors." And he was correct about that, because that was when it was, you weren't really welcome back into society. So I decided to go incognito a little bit, and I grew my sideburns long and grew a handlebar mustache, and to kind of be undercover. That's when it was actually on the way home from Vietnam, on the flight home, it was a TWA charter, and I was so excited about going home, and I was writing St. Patrick's Day cards to girlfriends that I still kept in touch with. And there was this flight attendant that came up, and she was just a brazen hussy, and she started chatting me up and this sort of thing, and I had a little address book, and she picked up my address book, and she put her name and phone number and address in there, and it turns out that she lived on the south side of San Francisco. So we started dating and ended up in the following June getting married. And so she likes to brag that she picked me up on a flight home from Okinawa, which she did. So I've got a picture anyway at the Marine Corps ball in when I was going to Berkeley. It's embarrassing, these long sideburns and the big handlebar mustache in my uniform.
Oh.
And the administrative gunny sergeant at Alameda, where I'd go over and I'd pick my paycheck up, because back then you didn't have all this electronic ways of doing things. And he said, "Captain, can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Sure, what is it, Gunny?" He said, "Do you mind if we mail you your check? You're bad for morale around here." It was the Marine Corps unit. So from there, we got a little motorhome, and we set off with 2 cats. And my next duty assignment was in Washington, D.C., where I was assigned to Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, or HMX-1, which is the Presidential Helicopter Squadron. I spent 5 years with them.
Okay, so this is the part that I want to talk about, because this is the thing that when we had that whole first meeting, it didn't come out at all. And it wasn't until later that I had heard from somebody else. Did you know? So let's talk about that. So first of all, I didn't, you always hear about Air Force One, except people are very aware of that. So Marine One, that means that it was the helicopter, right, anytime that you were carrying the president. But you did it for 3 presidents.
Yeah, it just happened to be that unique period of time that I got. My first flight was in May of 1974, and President Nixon was just coming back from Russia. He had been to China and had made some agreements and this sort of thing, very successful, and it was during Watergate. So they were trying to draw attention away from, let's get some more interesting news, and he'd gone to Russia, didn't accomplish much. And that was my first flight with Nixon, and he resigned that following October. So I got the last, say, 6 months of his tour, and then all of President Ford's, who took over when Nixon resigned, and then he didn't get reelected. So then the beginning of Carter. 3 of them were so different.
Well, you told me a story about. And I want you to tell the story, but hopefully this is enough information for you to know which story I'm talking about. But I think it was Nixon that you were flying, and you had landed, and you opened a window. Yeah.
That was the first flight, and it was middle of May.
It was your very first one?
My first one with the president.
Okay.
And I'd already been there maybe 8 months. You go through a lot of training and background checks. It's what they call the green side. And then when you get all these qualifications completed, then you move to what's called the white side. So I'd gotten all my completed all the training, and because it's totally different helicopter what the Marine Corps has in their inventory, so it's almost starting fresh. And you have to learn where things are in Washington, D.C. in case of emergency. And so you go up on they have a place called Anacostia, and it's where the Anacostia and the Potomac rivers come together, and it's a 3-acre plot with a big hangar on it. We keep 3 helicopters up there at all times, around the clock, to evacuate the White House, the vice president, and then anybody else that needs to be evacuated. And so you go up there and you learn the area of Washington, D.C. and where landing zones are and where all the secret places are in the mountains and that sort of thing. So the first flight, again, it was a Sunday in May, beautiful day, and you come into the White House lawn. You come in from the south over the Jefferson Memorial, and you've got the Washington Monument on your right and the Lincoln Memorial on your left, and you come down right into the back lawn of the White House. And so they're making a big deal out of this. So there must have been 1,500, 2,000 people lining the lawn, and they had all the networks, all 3 of them, back then, with their television cameras. So we go in, and you have a checklist that you go through. The co-pilot reads, and the commanding officer of the squadron is always the pilot for the president, and then everybody else is a co-pilot, the system, and I was the co-pilot. And you go through the checklist, and you realize how important the checklist is because it's so distracting, almost like combat, but totally different situation.
Yeah.
And very distracting. So you didn't want to land with the gear up, that'd be embarrassing. So you go through the checklist and land. There's a couple little things they never told you, like what the protocol was when you are sitting there. So on the left side, which is where the door was, so I said, well, I better see how things are going. So I open the window there and stick my head out to see what's happening. Well, this is all on national television. So this is, I guess, my photo bombing of President Nixon as he got off the plane, and Vice President Ford was there to greet him. And then all the squadron, of course, they're back at the Anacostia and back at Quantico watching this on television. Needless to say, I never heard the end of that one.
I actually was doing a search the other day. I was trying to figure out if I could find any video or any pictures from that, and just because I would love to see that.
Actually, I do have a picture on my wall of that very.
I would love to see that.
The left hand opening the window, and
that's such a great story. That's awesome. So, and I did ask you this before, and I loved your answer because I think about flying presidents and how nerve-wracking that is. And I asked you about that. I'm like, stupid question, but was that nerve-wracking? You were like, well, because I was like, what's the president? Like, it's the president. You said, all life is important when you're a pilot. And I was like,
is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess that's right. So, but can you share a little bit about that as far as, just the realization that you're carrying the president?
Well, as I said, you don't want to make a mistake. You want to make an ass of yourself. And I guess the one where that was the most aware of was I got to take, and I was the plane commander on this particular mission, to take the president of Germany from it wasn't the White House itself, but there's a big concrete area right between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. And they had the band out, the Army band and this sort of thing. And we went to pick him up there and take him over to Andrews Air Force Base. Well, it was foggy. The clouds were right down 50 feet off the ground. So as soon as you lifted off, you were in the soup. And you've got the Washington Monument over here about 200 yards away, and you don't know you don't know what else is in there. You know that there's power lines and all this stuff. You get up, and I was about 300 feet before they could pick you up on radar. So you're totally on your own.
Oh, boy.
Lifting up. All of a sudden, everything disappears. And so you're totally on instruments. Flying, I've got the president of Germany on board. Please don't crash. And I was able to get up high enough where I was picked up by radar and make an instrument approach into Andrews. But it's, you're totally flying on instruments. Marines don't do that a whole lot. So it's, yeah.
Again, my palms are sweaty all over again. Just the thought of it. What an extraordinary career. And I know there was a lot, there are many more things that you could tell us about that. I am amazed that the fact that you had this really tremendous and a rare career. This has been, everything you've told us up to this point is extraordinary. And then when you leave the military, then what?
Well, as I said, we spent close to 25 years, and I was getting up at that point where I've been the commanding officer of the Marine Barracks at Whidbey Island, and from there went back to grad school, got my advanced degree, and then my last 3 years were in the Pentagon, and I worked. Worked in aviation procurement, and there are 6 Coast Guard helicopters out there that I like to say are mine, because the Department of Defense they took them out of the budget. And so I got to go down and argue as why the Coast Guard needed them, and they put them back in the budget. But anyway, that was my last tour, and I was coming up for promotion, and I said, I don't even want to stick around to be turned down. My next tour would be a desk job somewhere. And I said, no, let's try a new life. So we both decided to retire. Leah was still flying for TWA at the time. And so 1989, we both decided to retire. We bought a big motor home. We had 2 cats and a dog, and we just hit the road. It's very serendipity. And we went down to Disney World, and I guess the adventure of that trip was rescuing cats out of trees and strange places, and wondered if we were going to get through the trip with all 3 of them, which we did. And we toured the country. And we ended up in Portland. And we went down to Arizona. And even though it was October, it was 105 every day. Said, nope, this isn't for us. We actually went into a park. It was so shocking, and we were too young. We couldn't stay there because we were too young.
So this is Clint wants to join an over 55 community right now, and he's not even 50 yet, but he's excited about it.
Yeah, well, we're in the same situation. And so we decided we threw out the anchor, and we stayed in Portland. And so I went into got trained. It weren't real welcome. It was tough, at the time, interviewing for jobs, not like Idaho. I say, boy, if I knew what I knew today, there's a lot of help out there for veterans getting out and helping them find, like Mission 43 and, this sort of thing. But there wasn't back in the 1990s, especially in Oregon. There's just no military presence. So it wasn't terribly well received. And I did get a job in finance, and I got went through all the training and got all the licenses and this sort of thing. And I said, here I've gone through 25 years of doing interesting stuff. And I said, I've got to get connected to the community. Didn't know a soul. My dad knew somebody that was was a stockbroker, but that was it. Didn't know anybody. So I walked into the local dry cleaners, and I said, are you in Rotary? Because I saw this Rotary. He said, no, but my wife is. Says, well, I'm interested. So I joined Rotary, and it was like joining a family. And a lot of connections, and I joined the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce they had a local festival called the Crawfish Festival. And the Crawfish Festival had been around about 40 years, and the group that ran it was at odds with the city. And the city wanted to make big payments for doing the overtime for the police. So the group said, we quit. So the Chamber of Commerce took it over, and I thought, I've put on parades, I put on air shows, and that's fun. I've done this kind of thing before. So I went into the chamber. I said, you need somebody to run your festival? And I took it over for 3 or 4 years and said, this is kind of interesting. So I went into the festival business, event management.
Well, and a perfect person for that. You're just so lively and fun and interesting.
And that's actually how I got to know Boise. I got into a specialized area where we did auditing at big festivals. And one of our clients was the Western Idaho Fair at the fairgrounds here. And I'd come over every August for it, and we'd audit all the food vendors that were part of the festival.
Interesting. So you started. I mean, I know that you are currently in Rotary. I didn't realize that started so long ago. So you've been doing this for quite some time. You've been a part of Rotary for a very long time.
Yeah. We had before we actually got involved in it, we had a friend of ours that was in it, and they had an exchange student, high school age student was coming from Australia, and they have a program where we send students to other countries, and they send students from other countries here. For example, our club of Boise Southwest has an exchange student from Japan that we're hosting this year. But there was a young lady coming from Australia, and he said, can you guys be a host? So for 6 months we hosted when she was a 13-year-old who interviewed for this program was not the same young lady that showed up at the age of 15. And we always, Lee and I would say to each other, said, someday she's going to have a daughter, and it's going to be payback. Well, she's had 5 daughters because we've actually kept in touch with her over the years. But anyway, she had 5 daughters. And that got me interested. So I joined the local Rotary, and it's just out of curiosity. I wanted to learn more, and the more I learned is a realization the less I knew. And I actually went to a guy that I respected, and I had to fill out a form, and I wanted to make sure I did it right. So I went and I asked him, I said, is there a point in time when you ever understand what Rotary's all about? He said, I've been in it for 35 years, and I still don't understand it. And that was true. And so I just became more and more involved, and it's been kind of and actually there was a point in the early 2000s that actually became my life.
Yeah, you've traveled all over the world for Rotary.
Yep. I've been to Uganda, Cambodia, Poland, Singapore, Thailand, other places that I can think of.
That's amazing.
And it's about the kids. I've got a story I tell. And it actually took place when I was in the Marine Corps. We were in the Philippines, and it was that second tour. And they'd come up. There was a village that had been isolated by heavy rainstorms, and a Navy chief had somehow taken the village under his wing, and he'd procured several pallets of food to take in there. So I was assigned a mission to take these pallets of food to this village. A lot of interesting things that went into this whole story about finding the village from the air and going into landing. But I always remember we found it, landed, we were offloading it, and the Navy chief had brought a bag of candy with him, and he was handing it out to the kids. We're just watching these children that lived in the middle of, I call it the jungle, but nowhere, and the excitement of a big airplane coming out of the sky and having food and getting candy, and the excitement and the smiles on their faces. And so I call it Smiles of the Jungle, or How I Found My Passion in the Philippines. And it's been the kids that has really driven me. And probably one of the memories that I have the most is we were in a little town called Iganga in Uganda. And there is a place called Bishop Willie Primary Training School. And it's where they train college graduates to become primary school teachers. So they had a student body of about 200, and it was in Iganga was a community of maybe between 7,000 people with several schools, and they had one well that served all these people. And the well had been drilled back in 1970s and was on its last legs. So our three of us, two other Rotarians and I, went to go to the village and look what can be done to help them out. So part of our visit there, we stayed at the local school, and I always remember each day we go farther and farther from the capital and Kampala, and thinking it's going to get more rural as we go, which it did. But anyway, we're staying there, and we visited a children's orphanage. And I like to call it a baby orphanage because it was for children from birth up to the age of 4. And we got a tour of it. It was a Catholic nun that kind of ran the place. And I remember the cribs had a Rotary plaque on it. A Canadian Rotary Club had given the orphanage these cribs. But I remember walking out, and I was the first one that walked out of the building, and I turned around, and Mike and Jim were big guys, and each one of them had a orphan holding their hands. And one of them, you know how you stand on a foot of a adult, and you sort of ride their foot. Well, one was riding, I think it was Mike's foot, and and the smile on their faces. And I always remember a Rotarian had gone to Romania and looked at orphanages, and he came back and he said, one of the most important things in the world is a hug. You need in life needs hugs. And that's what these kids were so starved for, was the human touch and the smiles on their faces, and these two big guys looking down at these little teeny kids, and the little kids were just so happy. And I'd seen that so many times. We in Cambodia, we went on a group. It was called Golden Leaf Education Foundation, and I was the first president of the group. And our goal was we would raise money, and we'd go to schools that were already in existence, but we'd build a new block of schoolrooms. So we'd fund to do that, because back during the Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, when they had taken over in the 1970s, the things that had been built back then were just falling apart, and so they needed upgrading. So this was our first school that we built. We went back to do the grand opening and ceremony, and we visited other places, and we bought bicycles, because bicycles are the primary transportation, especially for the kids, to get to and from school. So a bicycle might mean a difference between whether a kid's going to get an education or not. It was that important. But seeing the smiles on their faces when you gave them a bicycle. Or in India, we went to do a polio vaccination, what they call a national immunization day. And they would advertise, and then on a Sunday, they would immunize children all over India, and then they would do a follow-up for 5 days. So in that one immunization day, they did 128 million children got the 2 magic drops of the polio vaccine. So I went with a group. Our first stop, we delivered the vaccine around to the different stations. And I remember our very first stop was literally on the border of Cambodia and Laos. And we went to the border, and we met the Cambodian authorities. And they said, on a sidewalk next to a building that it was been torn down, and the healthcare worker, India, had was able to develop a marvelous medical coordination for doing these vaccinations. And the lady set up a card table, and the kids started showing up. So Lee and I we were so clever. We bought a roll of stickers, and the stickers were cute little animals. We thought, okay, when a child gets their 2 drops, we'd put a sticker on them. Well, that lasted for one child, and all of a sudden, there were maybe 10. All of a sudden, there were 100 kids, and they weren't there for their vaccine. They were there because they heard about the stickers.
Oh.
So we stopped that real quick, and we went around to different places, and it was a medical facility, just a little 1-story building, and they were actually giving the drops in the back. So there weren't all the massive kids. And I always remember this one little boy came out, and he was with his dad, and putting the sticker on his chest, and the look, he wasn't quite sure what it was all about, but I looked up, and the look on the dad's face, knowing that his little boy is not going to be paralyzed from polio. And in India, you see the crawlers, the ones that have lost the use of their legs, and the only way to get around is to crawl. And the look on his face, knowing his child is going to be safe, just happiness.
That's incredible.
So, it's that's the reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. This is probably not a great time to be taking a break to thank our sponsor. However, I'm going to take a break to thank our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Zamzows, your local source for garden, pet, and planet-friendly products. At Zamzows, we believe strong communities grow from people who care. Visit Zamzows.com or stop by one of our 12 Treasure Valley locations.
Nobody knows like Zamzows.
Norb, I feel like you and I could talk for another 7 hours, and you have such great stories, and I so appreciate you being here. We're going to switch gears into an area that we like to call sharing is caring, or I like to call it rapid fire questions, although they don't have to be rapid fire.
Okay.
So you can answer them however you like. So here are you ready?
Yep,
for this? Okay.
I'm ready.
All right. So how about a leader or mentor who influenced you?
At one point in life, I used to have 5. And probably my first one was my grandfather. And my mother didn't like him. He was too much of a party guy. She didn't like him, and we moved away from there. But he was probably the very first one. And I still look up to him. And my father-in-law is one. And he defined the word gentleman. He treated people with such respect and with such care. And I can still picture, we'd go to dinner somewhere, and he would always, after we sort of get in, he'd always go to the server that helped us, and he would say something to them. He'd take their hand, and he'd say something to them. I never heard what it was, but I thought that was so cool. I don't usually tell people this, but I carry around a bunch of $50 bills, and if the server has got an extra big smile or something, I take a jack, and I go up and I take their hand and slip them a $50 bill and say thank them. Say you did such a marvelous job. You got such a beautiful smile. Keep it up.
I'm so grateful for people for different reasons. I think that's what helps us figure out who we are.
Sort of jerry pick.
Yeah.
What I take from people.
Yeah. Do you think your grandfather, if he were able to talk to you today, would say he was proud of all the things that you've done?
I think so. Yeah, he says, he might say, how come you're not hanging around with generals and that sort of thing?
Oh, grandparents are always going to say something like that, right?
Well, I've got pictures of him, Bing Crosby, at a party at his house. And
wow.
He and Charlie Chaplin fooling around and, things like that. So he was that level,
Very cool.
I like to be more at this level.
pretty extraordinary. Okay, next question. This is on topic. Okay, how about a book, a quote, or philosophy guiding you today?
I'd almost have to go back to, say, The Hobbit. The determination to carry on, to carry through, when you've got a goal, to overcome the obstacles, just taking the whole general story to the point where I've read it twice,
Man.
all the books. My philosophy was everybody has something to offer, and to treat people that way. That people have an opportunity to and help when you can.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great answer. And my husband Clint will love that you said that. He was just lecturing me because I haven't seen the Hobbit movies. And I know how the gasp all around. I know. Well, we were on a walk and he was like, let's see if we can get home and get is there time for you to could we get it started? So I will be watching it soon because he couldn't believe it. So and now I'm really excited about it.
Oh, good.
Okay, how about a Boise spot that you love or find restorative?
I thought about that in my backyard. I have to thank Zamzows. I'm not being paid for this. But we have a Zamzows near us. Anyway, we moved in and it was an empty canvas. And it was a big backyard. And I wanted a small backyard. This was huge by comparison to, it was bigger than the one I had in Oregon. But it had a row of evergreen trees along the back fence that were very small. They weren't even as tall as the fence. And now there are days I've counted over 100 birds. I've got bird feeders up. And we had one day, I think I got 25 quail I was able to count in the backyard with their little ones running around.
Yes, that's the best.
And I just sit in the chair and sit quietly so that the birds get used to they don't see me anymore, and they come in and just the activity, and it's the colors, and it is a very calming spot. I could sit there for an hour, a couple of hours, just meditating.
Yeah, my husband and I do the same thing. We absolutely love it. We just recently got one of those bird feeders that has the camera.
Oh,
so we haven't set it up yet, but we're very excited about it. We've got to figure out where to put it, but we're very excited because apparently AI will they'll look at the picture and then they'll tell you what the types of birds are.
Yeah.
So we have a book that we, and we make little notches in the pages from this is one that came to our yard, and we get all excited about it.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, it's very fun. Okay. Last question. Something outside service that you do. So acting, travels, hobbies that bring you joy.
We love traveling. I have a hat that I collect the flag of a country, a pin, and I drive everybody crazy, especially if we're a group, because I've got to find that hat pin, which means, going into souvenir shops. And a lot of countries don't revere their flag like we do here. So they're hard to find. But I love acting. I got into it. We lived on Whidbey Island, and Leah would be gone for 5 days at a time. And Whidbey Island had 16 churches and one bar. So you can see what a lively place that was. And the local community theater was having an open house. We decided just to go see what they were doing, and they were going to audition for South Pacific. Now, I've been to a theater in the audience, but like in high school, I didn't even know we had a theater. Mm-hmm. And so Leah dared me to audition. So I walk in, and the music director looked just like Burl Ives, about 300 pounds. He had a little goatee mustache and wore a beret. And he says, "Well, what are you going to sing for me?" I said, "Sing? You got to be kidding me. Don't you have a speaking part? South Pacific, right?" So I refused to sing, but I ended up in the chorus anyway.
You just needed bodies at that point.
And that did it. Nope. I like learning lines for some reason, mm-hmm. and I use that at night when I go to bed. That puts me to sleep. Ah. Like now I'm learning the night before Christmas. So I recite it, and I can get through about a third of it. And that's all that's needed to fall asleep. And actually got to be in a movie. And
Oh man. This is kind of all coming together for me because the last time that we were seated at a table together, my daughter and her boyfriend were at the table, and she's 18, and a lot of people shy away from one. I mean, who wants to really you just never know with 18-year-old. Like, what are you going to get? You're not sure. You guys didn't know. You had met us, but we introduced you to her, and the whole conversation, the four of you were talking, and Clint and I were just going back and forth watching, and you were so engaged with both of them.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I get it now, because obviously she also is, because she had told you what she was going to school for, and so you were talking about all that. I guess I didn't realize how connected you were with all of that until I saw the two of you just, and I loved it, because anybody who wants to talk to my kid just makes me it's my kid. So that's pretty great. All right, Norb, it is time now for the last question of the show. It's the question we ask everybody. There are no rules. So here's the question. What is something that nobody knows?
I would say, well, actually, you know it now. I've never even listened to a podcast.
I love that answer.
I think I did. I think I heard one about basketball one time, but I'm not sure.
Sometimes we hear them, we don't even know we're listening to a podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love it. Well, I'm glad. this is your first one that you get to be a part of. I feel honored. And I really appreciate the time that you gave us today. Your stories are incredible. I feel like I said earlier, we could go on, and I would love to just drain your brain of everything that you've gone through and all the wonderful adventures you've been on. Well, wonderful and not so wonderful, but interesting.
Yeah.
You've lived a very interesting life. And our community is really lucky to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a wonderful community to be a part of.
I think so, too. It's a pretty great place. It's even better with you in it.
Thank you.
All right. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast and leave a review. Next week, we'll hear from another incredible voice shaping the Treasure Valley. Until then, thanks for listening.